Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the part 4 of season 2 in the Keio International Christian University Colloquium. I'm Seunghun Lee from International Christian University. Today, we have 2 exciting talks by Chikako Takahashi at Stony Brook University and Jianjing Kuang at the University of Pennsylvania. Shigeto Kawahara from Keio University will introduce Chikako, and then she will give a talk. Go ahead, Shigeto.
All right, my pleasure. Hello, everyone. I know this is Thanksgiving weekend, but welcome. It's my great pleasure to introduce Chikako. She is a graduate student at Stony Brook University right now, and we have just heard that she defended her dissertation on Monday. A big achievement during the pandemic. She has already published a paper on metathesis in phonology. That's a notable achievement itself, but her dissertation is on an entirely different topic, which is the phonetics of L2 speech, and that's what we are going to hear. I'm pleased to hear about it because this is a topic that's underrepresented in our series. So without further ado, Chikako, please go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Let me see. Can everybody see the screen? Is this okay?
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm just going to start like this. So thank you again for the invitation to give this talk. I'm very excited to present part of my dissertation work, which I defended Monday, like Kawahara sensei said. So my work is on L1 and L2 phonetic interaction, but especially on second language learning influence on first language. Oops, sorry. Just want to go like this. So I will first introduce the phenomenon of L1 phonetic drift. Then I will briefly go over the experiment methods and procedures of my study. We will spend most of the time on the key results in L1 vowel production and perception. And then I will specifically focus on how L2 perception and L2 dominance might influence L1 phonetic drift, and the general discussion will follow. So first, I will discuss the concept of L1 phonetic drift and provide some background along with the specific issues we are dealing with, and present some of my research questions. So when we consider second language learning, especially in the case of sequential L2 learning, in which you learn a new language after the acquisition of the first language, we all know that your first language system influences your second language learning. This L1 influence on L2 learning has been extensively documented, especially in the domain of speech perception and production. So most people, even non-linguists, are aware that L1 influences L2. However, research over the past decade has shown that learning of L2 sound can also influence L1 pronunciation and perception. And this L2 influence on L1 pronunciation and perception have been referred to as L1 phonetic drift. So the key idea is that learning a new language can influence the perception and production of your first language. So growing number of studies have suggested that L2 sound learning influences L1 sound representation. Again, the idea is that when you learn a new L2 sound that is phonetically similar to an L1 sound, the L1 sound production or perception is influenced. And such influence can be manifested in 2 possible ways. One is that L1 sound might be pulled toward a similar L2 sound in some acoustic dimensions. Therefore, the L1 sound becomes somewhat similar to an L2 sound. Or the L1 sound can shift in the opposite direction, moving away from its associated L2 sound. In both cases have been reported in the literature. So why do we care? Why do we care that L2 learning influences your L1 pronunciation and perception? So the idea that L2 learning influences the established L1 sound system is surprising because it demonstrates that the L1 system is not as static as once thought, and it can be reorganized. Also, L1 and L2 phonetic interaction during L2 development provides a window into the nature of sound representations in a language and the cognitive factors that might be involved in L2 phonetic learning. So while L1 phonetic drift has been observed in a number of studies, there is much uncertainty about how L1 and L2 interact. For instance, it is not clear when an L1 change occurs in relation to an L2 phonetic development and why there are differences in the nature of L1 change, since both assimilation and dissimilation have been observed. It is also not clear if there is a limit to L1 change and what factors influence the L1 drift. Flegge's speech learning model discusses some of these questions and offers some ideas, but does not directly answer these questions. Answering these questions is critical to understanding the L1 and L2 phonetic interaction in one's L2 development, and these questions have motivated my study. So my main goal is to further our understanding of the underlying processes involved in L1 phonetic drift. To do that, I set out to answer two main research questions. The first one is, what is the nature of L1 and L2 phonetic interaction in late L2 learners? Does an L1 sound become more like an associated L2 sound, showing assimilatory drift, or become more different, exhibiting dissimilatory drift? Previous studies have observed both assimilatory and dissimilatory drift for late L2 learners. So we wanted to know what types of L1 drift our participants show. Since L1 drift has also been observed in both advanced and beginner learners, we also wanted to find out how L1 drift is manifested in one's L2 developmental path. So the second question asks, what factors are associated with the direction and extent of L1 drift? Several studies have suggested production acuity, meaning how native-like learners produce an L2 sound, language dominance factors such as L1 and L2 use and exposure, and learning context, either immersion or non-immersion context, to be determining factors of the nature of L1 drift. That is, these factors determine the direction and extent of the drift. So in my study, we investigate which factors might be associated with a particular direction of L1 drift and how much it changes. So I'll briefly go over the experimental methods and the target contrast. So the project I'm talking about today is a speech perception and production study targeting late L1 Japanese learners of L2 English. The main participants of the studies were 61 L1 Japanese learners of English. For the rest of the presentation, I will call them bilinguals, although they varied in terms of proficiency and L2 learning experience. All of them commenced English learning at around or after the age of 12. Half of them were recruited in Japan and the other half were recruited in the US. As controlled, we recruited 21 functional monolingual Japanese and 16 functional monolingual English speakers. So to answer the research questions I just discussed, I conducted various experiments to elicit learners' speech in L1 and L2, along with behavior responses that would inform us about their perception of L1 and L2. We also included the questionnaire that gave us information about situational factors such as the learner's L2 learning experience, use, exposure, proficiency, and attitude toward L1 and L2 culture in order to examine the correlation with production and perception results. So I conducted 3 experiments for production and 2 for perception. Today, I'm going to focus on the results from word reading task in production and category goodness rating task. and also the relationship between the relative language dominance measured in the questionnaire and the production and perception results. So we are interested in how learning new phones, L2 phones or phonetic characteristics interact with speakers' existing L1 phonetic system. To investigate this, I focused on English and Japanese voices stops and high-phone vowels. In this talk, I will focus on the vowel result, but if you have time during the Q&A session, I can also discuss a little bit about the VOT results. So for vowels, we focused on high-phone vowels in the two languages, Japanese vowel E and I, English vowel E and I. So since Japanese does not have I in its vowel inventory, learners need to learn that vowel. Now we will first discuss the production experiments and its main results on how bilinguals' production differed from Japanese monolinguals. The production experiment focused on the high-phone vowel and several peripheral vowels in English and Japanese. Japanese set included a total of 81 words per set, and English set included 113 words. We had a total of 3 sets for each language. They were visually presented in a pseudo-randomized order in each set, and participants were asked to read each word in carrier sentences. The recording was auto-segmented using module forced aligner. The midpoint F1 and F2 of the marked steady state were automatically extracted. Of those, about 2% were excluded since there was either no discernible steady state or it was clear that participants misread the English word. So to investigate the nature of L1 drift, we first need to determine what patterns of L1 drift are observed in a diverse population of late L1 Japanese learners of L2 English. So here is key English and Japanese vowels produced by monolingual speakers, English on the left and Japanese on the right. F1 and F2 formant values were normalized, but they still visualized the two-dimensional vowel space. Again, our focus was English and Japanese high-phone vowels as indicated by the blue arrows. We also collected data on a subset of peripheral vowels, so as to gather information on individual vowel spaces. So the important point here is that while there are 2 high-phone vowels in English, there is only 1 in Japanese. Some previous studies have shown that Japanese learners of English associate both of these English vowels to the Japanese E. So we are interested in how learning to perceive and produce an English E would influence the perception and production of Japanese E. Since English E, as in bit, is a new vowel for Japanese learners of English, we predict 2 possible ways of Japanese E moving in relation to the new English sound. Japanese E can move up, dissimulating away from new L2 phone E, as in the picture on the left, okay? Or it can move down, assimilating toward the L2 phone. And here is the English vowels produced by bilinguals on the right and monolingual English speakers on the left. If you look at bilinguals as a group and their production of 2 English vowels, hyphen vowels, and compare them to those of monolingual English speakers, we can see that bilinguals as a group did not differentiate the 2 hyphen vowels very much, overlapping in some places. So how does learning English influence the production of Japanese E? Here, bilinguals Japanese E, which is represented by a green ellipse, is added along with the gray polygon representing Japanese monolinguals production. So what we need to do is to compare bilinguals Japanese E with monolinguals production. As we can see here, bilingual seems to be using a higher space as compared to monolinguals. So while bilinguals as a group generally showed upward drift of Japanese E, there was variability among bilingual participants in terms of the direction of the drift. So most showed signs of dissimilatory drift, so upward drift, but some showed signs of assimilatory drift, which is downward drift in this case. So when we compared those two groups, we found that bilinguals who showed signs of assimilation had significantly higher English production acuity scores compared to those who showed signs of dissimilation. So what I mean by production acuity score here is that we used two types of native likeness measures. One was the distance between bilinguals' production of I to the monolingual English speakers' production, and also the distance between English E and I produced, since monolingual English speakers E and I had completely separate distributions. So what this indicates is that as bilinguals learn to produce new L2 sound I, they lower their Japanese E toward the associated L2 I. To further investigate the pattern of L1 drift, I grouped bilinguals based on their L2 production acuity. So this time we used English E is separateness as an acuity measure. So the overlapped group here on the left include bilingual participants who produced the two high-phone English vowels overlapped. Whose production of the two high-phone vowels overlapped. For the sake of time, I will skip the specific grouping criteria, but the native-like group on the right included bilinguals who produced two English vowels as far as monolingual English speakers did. So it's basically, you can kind of think of these grouping as beginner learners to more advanced learners to the right. So we are most concerned with how the green ellipses representing bilinguals Japanese E differ from the gray polygons representing monolinguals Japanese E. As indicated by the red arrows, we can see that upward divergence is exhibited in 4 out of 5 subgroups. The significant star indicates the difference between bilinguals' production of Japanese E as compared to the monolingual group on F1 and F2. However, the group that produced the most native-like English high-front vowels did not show L1 drift. The 3 vowels in the 2 languages seems to be separate from each other. I'd like to now focus on the 2 rightmost groups, semi-native-like and native-like group. Participants in each group exhibited 2 English high-front vowels that were significantly different from each other in F1 and F2 space, but only the native-like group produced native-like distance between the 2 English vowels. When we compare the semi-native-like group and the native-like group, the semi-native-like group had a much larger upward drift. Since there was not much difference in terms of the location of English E, shown in darker blue, and the main difference between the 2 groups were the native likeness of English I, shown in light blue. I believe this is this upward divergence is a dissimilatory drift. Therefore, L1 Japanese E dissimilated for bilinguals who tend to separate a new L2 vowel I, but not yet able to produce it in a native-like manner. So since L1 assimilators seems to be those who can produce L2 I in more native-like manner, it seems that L1 generally assimilates as learners make progress in learning to produce a new L2 sound. However, the reason why we don't see the strong assimilatory drift might be because Japanese E is associated with the two L2 sounds, E and E. On the other hand, dissimilation seems to occur for bilinguals who can somewhat separate L1 and the associated L2 sound, but yet unable to produce native-like L2 form. We will come back to these points later, but what I like to do now is to look at some of the perception results. So we generally saw upward drift of Japanese vowel E in production, based on the common view that perception leads to production in phonetic development. It is possible that L1 production drift is due to L1 perception drift. So another question we will now try to answer is whether or not the bilingual in our study also exhibit perceptual L1 drift. We are also interested in how L2 perceptual ability influences L1 perception and production, since an SLM speech learning model, as well as in many other L1 drift studies, it is assumed that L1 drift has perceptual basis. So first, we will look at L1 perception results from goodness rating task and see if L1 production drift is due to L1 perceptual drift. So for Japanese goodness rating task, we focused on hibi-hebi contrast, since Japanese e is close to English e in terms of their acoustic correlates. We are interested in how learning a new L2 sound of English e influences the perceptual boundary between Japanese E and E and their goodness rating of these stimuli. 11 members synthetic items that sounded like hibi or hebi were created based on monolingual Japanese speaker speech. Participants were asked to decide which word it was. Then they heard the stimuli once again and rated the pronunciation on a scale of 1 to 7. Participants were allowed to listen to each stimuli multiple times. So here is the result for the categorization. So there was no noticeable difference between bilinguals and monolingual Japanese groups in terms of their perceptual category boundary between hibi and hebi, which is, you can estimate the boundary around 50% area here. However, the goodness rating of L1 Japanese vowels revealed a difference between bilinguals and Japanese monolinguals. Bilinguals showed vowel rating patterns that were different from monolinguals, giving generally higher ratings on hibi-like stimuli and lower ratings on hebi-like stimuli. This could be possible precursor to category boundary change, expanding perceptual category of E. But we will come back to this point a little later. Next, we will look at bilinguals' L2 perception results and how it is associated with the L1 drift. We will also look at the relationship between L1, L2 dominance and the nature of L1 drift. So for English, we did the same kind of goodness rating task, but on the continuum between beat and bit. And we compared the bilinguals' performance with monolingual English speakers. And here is the result. So the reason why categorization of beat-like stimuli on the left did not reach 100% was probably because the duration of the stimuli were kept the same, which probably made beat-like stimuli sound less natural for some speakers. But what I'd like to focus here is the categorization of bit-like stimuli in the yellow circle. So here, the group difference is clear. Monolingual speakers were able to categorize bit-like stimuli as bit, close to 100% of the time, but not bilinguals. However, having said that, there was a large variability between participants in their ability to categorize L1 English A. And also to gather information on relative L1, L2 dominance, I used a modified version of bilingual language profile by Bersong et al. 2012, which allowed me to quantify relative L1, L2 dominance in 5 areas: language experience, use, exposure, proficiency, and attitude, and also compute overall dominance score. Sorry. And again, there was a large variability in language dominance score within the bilingual group, which is not surprising since participants were recruited in Japan and as well as in the US. So using those information, I did another grouping. So this is a grouping based on L2 perceptual ability and L1, L2 dominance score. So since there was a variability in the bilingual group in their categorization patterns, and also L1 drift is thought to have a perceptual basis, we grouped bilinguals based on their ability to perceptually categorize it. We also grouped them based on their L1, L2 dominance, since again, there was a variability in the dominance score, and dominance factors such as L1, L2 use and exposure have been thought to influence L1 drift. So combining those two factors, we created 4 subgroups. So non-native like here means they were not able to categorize English I in a native-like manner. Within those groups, there was people who were L1 dominant and L2 dominant. The same goes for the native-like group, who were able to categorize English I native-like in a native-like manner. So using those grouping, I looked at the production data again. So this is their production results of Japanese E based on this new grouping. So the star again indicates the significant difference between bilinguals Japanese E, as shown in green ellipses, and monolingual Japanese E in gray polygons. So one thing to notice here is that bilinguals who were L2 dominant tended to produce more native-like lower and backer L2 English I, as indicated by the red arrows, with some signs of L2 assimilatory drift as indicated by the green arrows. We also noticed that bilinguals who were L1 dominant tended to produce significantly higher and fronter L1E as compared to the monolingual norm. And we believe this is a dissimilatory drift away from L2 English I. We believe this is a case of dissimilation away from English I because it correlates with L2 production acuity subgrouping results we saw earlier. Here we can see that the most pronounced dissimilation was exhibited by a group of bilinguals who were native-like in categorizing E, indicating that they had the perceptual ability to differentiate A from E, but who were L1 dominant and unable to lower A as much as the L2 dominant group. So this result is in line with the idea discussed in SLM and several other studies that bilinguals generally strive to separate L1 and L2 phones. So here, dissimilation seems to be happening because learners notice L1, L2 difference evidenced by the perceptual result, but they are not able to lower their L2 in production to create enough distance from the associated Japanese E. So instead, they raise Japanese E to create more or enough distance from each other. So we also looked at how L1, L2 dominance, relative dominance is related to the L1 drift. So as for those relationship, Lesser L2 use, exposure, and weaker relative dominance in L2 were associated with the greater extent of L1 E dissimilation away from English I, but the correlation was only found in separated and semi-native-like group. On the other hand, overall L2 dominance seemed to be associated with L2 production acuity. So more dominant you are in L2, better you can produce more native-like A, which is not surprising. We also looked at perception result again using the same subgrouping. This subgrouping revealed a clear category boundary shift of Japanese vowel E for bilinguals who were non-native-like in categorization of E, but dominant in their L2. This is indicated by the red line in the categorization task result in the figure on the left, and also the goodness rating task result on the right. So why this group? Why does it look like this particular group is expanding the perceptual category boundary of E onto E? Because this L1 perceptual category expansion was observed among participants who were not able to categorize the new L2 phone the way monolingual English speakers can, but had higher L2 use, I argue that this phenomenon was caused by L2 learning. That is, their L2 perception results indicate a maintained perceptual association between Japanese E and English E. But the fact that they were dominant in their L2 indicate they had been receiving a lot of input of L2E. So at this point, it is possible that the increased L2 input is still associated with their merged L1, L2 category, as indicated by the yellow circle in B, but it was pulled down to reflect the English I input. In turn, since L1, L2 vowels were still in the same category, it influences the category boundary between Japanese E and E. So based on the result I presented, I'd like to briefly discuss what they mean in terms of nature of L1 drift and the factors examined in this study. So one of the main goals was to find out if factors such as L2 dominance were associated with L1 drift. Our data overall indicates that relative L2 dominance plays a nuanced role in L1 drift. L2 dominance does not seem to be independently determine the presence or absence of L1 drift. Overall, assimilators tended to have higher L2 dominance than dissimilators, but the dominance pattern tended to parallel L2 production acuity as well. And overall, L2 dominance alone does not seem to determine the direction of the drift. Instead, it seems that relative L1, L2 dominance factors might still influence L1 drift, but they seem to do so mainly via L2 production acuity. Crucially, our findings suggest that the presence or absence of a new L1, L2 phonetic category does not seem to determine the direction of L1 drift, contrary to the assumption in speech learning model. So in SLM, also in several other studies, the presence or absence of assimilation and dissimilation is assumed to be tied to whether or not L2 learners have created the new phonetic category. However, what seems to matter here is the L2 learners' drive to maintain L1 and L2, rather than whether there's a clear separation of L1 and L2 categories. This is demonstrated by the data that shows assimilation occurring even for those who are quite advanced in L2 production, and dissimilation occurring for those who do not seem to have made much progress in L2 production. Therefore, based on this finding, I argue that the nature of L1, L2 association might change over time, but the association could be there indefinitely. And these findings help explain some of the variabilities found in the previous literature. And I hope to replicate those results, confirming my findings via longitudinal studies. So that's all for now, and thank you.
Thank you. So people are expressing thank you with their reactions. So the first question comes from Ai Mizoguchi at Maebashi Institute of Technology. Please unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hello. Hi, Chika-san. First of all, I just wanted to say congratulations for your great achievement. And my question is, I think Japanese learners, can you hear me?
Somehow I cannot hear anything.
Anything?
Oh, I can hear.
Can you hear me?
Can other
Yes.
people hear?
How about?
Yeah, we can hear you.
And I can hear you.
Yeah.
What?
Now I can hear you.
Yeah, you hear me? Yes. First of all, I wanted to
now
say.
I can't hear you. I don't know what happened.
What?
Can you try again?
Hello? Chika-san.
No, I can't hear you.
What?
Wait,
But
what did
how
I
about
do?
others? Other people?
I can hear both of you.
I can hear both of you.
Is it my connection?
But only me?
No, she doesn't seem to be able to.
Maybe
I still
Susan
can't
can
hear
repeat
anything.
the question.
I don't know
What?
why.
Can you type the question?
Okay, okay. I'll type it. I just wanted to. Well, okay.
I heard things for a little bit and then I lost.
First of all, she wanted to congratulate you on.
I'm sorry, I just don't know how to fix this.
Don't panic.
Okay, so I'll type.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Well, maybe I can skip this part. My mom, it's K. And my question is.
Let me try something. Hello? I think I can hear you now.
Oh,
can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So
Sorry,
congratulations.
Thank you.
On your great achievement. I'm so glad.
Thank you.
Yeah. So my question is, I think Japanese learners use durations as cues instead of formants, right?
Well,
so have you checked the durations of their production?
I do have, you mean, are you talking about the perception or production data?
I think production for like.
Right. So for the production, I did not measure the duration, but I think the fact that, let me just check. Let me just share the screen again. I think the fact that some of the English production, the fact that, here English E is a little bit fronter than Japanese E, maybe, is probably they were using the longer Japanese E to produce English E.
Right.
Because I think previous research has shown that long E and short E, it's not that different in terms of formant values, but it might be a little bit fronter. Yes. So I was not really focused on duration data, but I was more focused on if they can use the formant cues in production.
Right. Especially if they are getting, high proficiency, right?
Right. Yes.
Right.
Can really lower their
they tended to use more duration, okay, than formats, right? So I think it's completely related, like a duration and performance. It's kind of like trade-off or something like that.
Right, but so for the perception data, so even you know, even if you don't have the duration data, English speakers can generally differentiate E from I.
Mm-hmm.
My question will be, was if learners can use the format cues in perception and also in production.
Right. Yes, but that's really interesting. I want to see. Yeah, I want to talk to you more.
Yes.
Probably later.
Okay, the next question, thank you. The next question comes from Shigeto Kawahara, Keio University.
Thanks for this. This is really new to me. So this may be a naive question, but the drift that you see kind of manifests itself in terms of F1, at least more so than in F2. You have
Right. So I am actually both, but I am more interested in F1. It's just because F2, there's a kind of individual variability in terms of some people use frontal space to just create, produce all the 5 vowels. Some people use backer vowels, but the contrast seems to be more related to F1. So I was more interested in F1. But sorry, could you repeat your question?
Yeah, but I guess the question is, if it's just pure dissimulation in the acoustic space, you wouldn't expect F1 to have privilege over F2. Know what I'm saying? But the difference in magnitude seems to be larger in terms of F1. And I was wondering, I know you're interested in F1, but what's the explanation of why there are more pronounced differences in F1 than in F2?
Right. So I think it's because of let me just.
Yeah, that slide.
Right. So it's actually, so my thinking is basically you really have to lower your I to produce English I.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, and then the main difference here is basically F1.
Mm-hmm.
Then you would, to differentiate it, you would, bring it up. But then this is basically, kind of like simplifying it, right? Because I'm averaging it. And if you look at individual data, there's a lot of variability. And so I really need to look at the longitudinal data to confirm this.
So I guess that a simple answer is that F1 is more important in distinguish these 2 vowels, and that's why.
Right, that's my.
Okay, the drift is in that direction. Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. We have time maybe for a very short question. Yeah, there's a minor question from Maho Morimoto, Ninja.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, thank you for a very interesting talk. I have a minor question, as Lee Sensei said, and it's kind of a naive one. Just from my experience as a Japanese learner of English, as I learned English, I felt like suddenly I didn't know how to pronounce my Japanese vowels after palatal or alveopalatal vowels, like shi or ch. And so I was curious if you saw any effect of the preceding consonants on those vowels or any consonant.
So I originally wanted to study fricatives because the difference between Japanese and English fricative is very interesting. So I think that's the area that might be really interesting too. I just didn't choose fricative because it's very complicated to do. But I think I would expect to see differences there too, or drift effect there too. I think some people also ask me if there might be, observable drift effect in Japanese, like the, R. And anecdotally, like when I say arigato in Japanese. In my hometown, sometimes they tell me that my D is weird, right? So I think there's other, I think consonants are actually really interesting. I do have VOT data because it's the most well-studied area in terms of L1 drift, and we see more clearer kind of drift there because the association is more simpler than vowels. But I think fricatives and affricates, I think that's really interesting to look at.
So you might go forward with that, maybe.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I'm really looking forward to it because I really want to know what happened to my yoroshiku onegaishimasu and okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think time is up for question and answer. Let's thank Chikako one more time. Yeah. The recording will now be stopped. We'll stop.